Christ Church can trace its history back to 1871 and the reform laws of President Benito Juarez that allowed for religious freedom of worship. English-speaking immigrants and their children have found community serving together in Mexico City ever since. For more than 155 years, Christ Church has nurtured faith and hope through scripture and a sacramental theology that reminds us that we are united with the God of love.
Hello, I'm the Reverend Elizabeth Sinclair. It is my honor and privilege to be Christ Church's 30th rector in its over 155 years of existence here in Mexico City, Mexico. We are a multi-ethnic, multilingual, and intergenerational parish. Across its many years as a faith community in Mexico, Christ Church's members and the whole community have experienced God's faithfulness and redemption, too many times for us to count. Yet in this video, you will hear our stories. It is our joy to join with Mary, the mother of Jesus, in telling out our souls the greatness of God. Mary says in her song, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior."
Like most Episcopalians in the States, many of us were converts as adults, or young adults especially. And we were perhaps partly drawn by the sacramentalism and the beauty of the Book of Common Prayer, and yet still come to be a family, a community of human relationships, communally as well as our relationship with God. A relationship that through the sacraments that that we believe that God is in that bread, in that wine, and that it is that we are incorporated into God each and every time we do that. And the beauty of describing how we approach God and receive God, that one of the things that the Book of Common Prayer does is speaks that with great poetry that moves the soul.
One example of the poetry of the Book of Common Prayer is the baptismal covenant, which calls us to seek and serve Christ in all persons and to strive for justice and peace.
The Easter miracle is the center of our faith. And that process of Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, the Great Vigil, and Easter Sunday, when, the magnificent hymn goes, this is the feast day of the festival of our God. And it is, as a matter of the faith in communing with God, but also the beauty of how we are able to do it in this wonderful, beautiful place.
The beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega.
Well, I guess I could say that my life even began before I was born. Christ Church. My parents were married there. My husband's parents were married there. We grew up at Christ Church. Christ Church was just a very big part of our life. From the time I think we could walk, we were going to Sunday school, and it was just the thing to do. The church in those days was down in downtown on Artículo 123, number 134, and it was just what you did on Sunday mornings, was go to Christ Church. And so I grew up, and it's part of my life. I have known no other life except Christ Church when it comes to a church. And what can I say? It's part of my whole life.
Mis padres estuvieron cerca de 40 años ahí en Artículo 123, ¿sí? Entonces, cuando mi papá se jubiló, fue el 18 de mayo del 1984, ¿sí? Entonces yo me quedé ahí en Artículo 123, ¿sí? Okay. Estuve por 6 años, okay, hasta 1990, que fue cuando se jubiló ya otra vez mi papá de aquí, ¿sí? Okay. Entonces, ya de ahí fue cuando yo me quedé, pues ya desde entonces, ¿sí? O sea, yo tuve la oportunidad de ver cuando construyeron aquí la iglesia de Christ Church. Cuando se vinieron de allá de Artículo, la iglesia quedó aquí en el parish hall, ¿sí? Eso lo hicieron, pues estuvo hasta que empezaron a construir acá. Si usted quiere, yo conocí aquí el movimiento de la iglesia, pues conocí todo porque yo vine a trabajar en las oficinas de aquí del British Benevolent Society por 6 años. En lo que mi papá estaba aquí, yo venía a trabajar allá arriba, ¿sí? Por eso conocí mucho movimiento de aquí de la iglesia.
Many of the activities and traditions from the old church have continued at our new location. One example is that every year Christ Church continues to remember the soldiers from the community who gave the ultimate sacrifice of their lives to protect the freedoms that we enjoy. During the First and Second World War, American and British sons and daughters from Christ Church helped in the efforts. The English language newspaper, the Mexico City Post, documented their heroism.
I was really actually very young during the war. I was born during the war. But I know that all of the ladies of the American, the British, and also the Mexican community worked tirelessly at Christ Church. It was the group, and it made no difference. They cooked, they made cookies, they sent cookies, they knit, they helped the war effort however they were able to do so. Christ Church, whether it's the church's birthday or the bazaar, the Women's Guild is always on top of it all. And well, it's just part of being part of Christ Church that you go to church and you work for Christ Church to make it bigger and better than it possibly could be.
Our Anglican theology calls us to work toward the kingdom of God as we love and serve with gladness and singleness of heart. We tell out our soul in acts of service in many ways. Christ Church provides food, clothing, and companionship to orphans with disabilities at Casa Hogar La Divina Providencia throughout the year. Christ Church offers a rich music ministry that includes weekly services, but also many concerts. We host the largest English language used book sale in the entire city. Regular Sunday school and the church playground are important parts of our ministry with children. We are committed to enriching the beauty and wonder of creation by helping clean the Lago de Guadalupe. Every single day, Christ Church hosts an Alcoholics Anonymous group. These meetings provide a spiritual home for this community. Their members have proclaimed that these meetings have truly saved their lives. Christ Church hosts many community events in the parish hall. The Christmas Bazaar, hosted by the Guild, is the largest event of the year and our largest fundraiser for our ministry efforts. The Ladies' Guild was founded in 1894 and since that time has been vital to the life of the church. Another way that Christ Church serves the community is through a Eucharist service at the British Cemetery every year for Todos Santos and Dia de los Muertos. These are only some of the many ways that Christ Church serves the community. Our ministry is part of us.
So all these little things add up to having it be a big part of me. Physically, mentally, it's me. I can't imagine my life without Christ Church. To me, it's soothing, it's calming, it's love. Of course, it's God. I mean, I don't have to say that, but that's what it is to me. I feel at peace when I'm at church. It's a wonderful feeling. I said, Christ Church has always been Christ Church for me, regardless of where it is. The roof fell in, but I had to go and see it. I had to go. It was a burning desire. And I made Jimmy take me. He said, you don't want to see it. I said, yes, I have to see it. So we went to see it, and of course it was shattering. But the new church, which is where we are now, we loaded our car, and we took as much as we could load into the car from downtown up to where we are now, and the church wasn't finished. So services were in the parish hall.
The 1985 earthquake severely damaged the downtown church at Artículo 123. It was decided to move the church to its present location at Montes Escandinavos. The prominent architect Carlos Mijares Bracho designed the new church building. It was built on the property of the rector's home. First, the parish hall construction was completed. The parish hall offered a place of worship until the construction of the church building could be completed. Once finished, the United States presiding bishop Edmund Browning dedicated the new church. Carlos Mijares Bracho designed the church with Anglican theology in mind. The crypt is bathed in light to remind us that our loved ones rest in God's perpetual love. The arches of the church are also a reminder that God's love surrounds us like an embrace.
The Lord be with you. Hear the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. A los 6 meses, Dios mandó al ángel Gabriel a un pueblo de Galilea llamado Nazaret, donde vivía una joven llamada María.
Women's ordination goes back to the earliest centuries of the church. In Romans chapter 16, Paul describes Phoebe as a deacon. In the Bible, many other women are named as leaders of the early church, such as Lydia. Canon 15 of the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD declared that deaconesses are ordained and must practice celibacy after ordination. The council clarified that no woman under 40 years of age is to be ordained a deacon. Theodora, mother of Pope Paschal I, who lived in the 9th century, is depicted in a mosaic in the church of Santa Procede in Rome with the feminine title for a bishop, episcopa. In 1944, the first woman ordained as a priest in the Anglican Communion was Florence Lee Timoy, who was originally from Hong Kong. In the United States in 1974, the first 11 women, known as the Philadelphia 11, were ordained to the priesthood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The first female Anglican priest in Latin America was Christ Church's Reverend Tamara Newell. So what year was it that you were ordained to the diaconate, and where?
In 83 at Christ Church downtown. I was baptized, confirmed, married, ordained, and had my children baptized there. And one of my children sadly buried there. So Christ Church is really the cornerstone.
This is my body, which is given for you. Do this for the remembrance of me. After supper, he took the cup of wine, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them and said, "Drink this, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sins. Whenever you drink it, do this for the remembrance of me. Therefore, according to his command, O Father."
Churches, but I really remember from my childhood, and this was not at Christ Church, this was at the Episcopal Church in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, the processional and the crucifer and the robes. And as a child, I was enamored by that. I just adored it so much. And then when we moved to Mexico, we continued to go to, by then my mother had died, so the Christian Science religion lost its kind of impact, but my father continued to take me to church until I started to go on my own. I loved it. I really like church. And it amazes me that people don't happen to like it. A lot of people don't like it. I really love being there. I love the hymns. I love the liturgy. I really like it. So it was certainly being in love with the church. But through all of that, I had a very, very strong faith in Jesus. I mean, Jesus was very much a companion, probably since the time my mother died. I think Jesus just kind of moved in and said, "I'll take that place for the moment," and has ever since. So it's I have a very strong relationship with God as I see Him on the face of Jesus. It's been very powerful all along.
What were some of the challenges of becoming ordained? Like and how did you feel God sustaining you in the process? I imagine as the first woman, there were probably some challenges along the way.
Well, it didn't actually occur to me to do that. At the time I was going to Christ Church, the rector at the time was Bob Jones, who was a lovely, wonderful man. Actually, I think the longest serving rector at Christ Church. Such a wonderful man. And I would go early. I would always go early. I was just attracted to it. And I said to him one day, I love the church. I'm very glad to be here. I just really am offended that I can't acolyte. I think women should be able to acolyte. And Mr. Jones said, next week you'll acolyte, which I think was quite really something for him to say. And then after that, I started to go early to see, well, what should I do now? Today, should I acolyte? Should I read the lesson? Should I be a chalice bearer? What would you like to? So finally, one day he said to me, I know what it is about you. You want to be a priestess. And I thought, that's exactly correct. That's exactly what I want to be. It had never occurred to me until Mr. Jones spoke it. And I don't like to talk about this because doesn't sound nice, but the Mexican clergy said they would not. They would leave the church if they ordained a woman. So Bishop Saucedo, who was another very brave man at that time, and certainly a link in all this, an important link in all this, called me into his office and said, I would ordain you, but you're not enough to take care of all the churches. It'll be abandoned if I ordain you. So I'm going to have to put it off. And I was inspired by the Holy Spirit to say, I'm not being ordained for me, I'm being ordained for the church. If I hurt the church by being ordained, I obviously don't want to be ordained. I'm not really that kind of a person. I'm a little bit more selfish than that, but that was what came out of me. And I feel that way about the church. To this day, I feel that way about the church. So they ordained the other two guys, and Mr. Stringer, I can't remember his first name, and Tom Hawthorne, who then I think later went off to England. But anyway, Mr. Jones was very upset by the fact that happened. So he and the bishop got their heads together, and they contacted Bishop Trelease, who at that time was the bishop of the Rio Grande diocese. And they said, would you ordain her for us? And he said, well, sure, I will. So he put me through their standing committee and their ministry on ordination and all of that, or their commission on ministry. And they said that Bishop Trelease would ordain me. But he wasn't going to come to Mexico, and I was not invited to go there. So Bishop Saucedo said, I'm going to ordain her in the name of Bishop Trelease, and she'll be resident in the diocese of the Rio Grande. And that's what happened. There was no other priest at my ordination, but they stayed on with their cures, and then it didn't take too long before I was transferred to the diocese of Central Mexico, and then the Bishop Saucedo, took me everywhere he went, carrying his staff everywhere behind him everywhere he went, until people got used to seeing it,
For me, acknowledging God's goodness often involves recognizing blessings. I'll tell out my soul by sharing a serendipity with you. My wife, Reverend Elizabeth, and I have been at Christ Church since 2021. I remember when Elizabeth had her interview with the church, I called my mentor, Reverend Catherine Campbell, to ask her about it. I worshiped at Reverend Catherine's church, Iglesia San Jose, for years and knew that she was from Mexico City. After my wife's interview, when I called Reverend Catherine, I said to her, Reverend Catherine, Elizabeth's interviewing with an Anglican church in Mexico City. Do you know anything about it? Is it maybe even your church? Yes, she said. It was my church. I was in the children's choir there. It is such a touching serendipity for me to now minister in the church where my mentor grew up. She's been such a blessing to me, even preaching at our wedding. I hope and pray that we are now a blessing to Christ Church.
My earliest memories of Christ Church was, as I would say, I was maybe 6, 7, and singing in the children's choir, and we sang a cantata to creation. And it was absolutely gorgeous. And I really, really, I felt the holiness of the space, the sense of God's presence. At the time that I was going, basically it was morning prayer. Gordon Charlton actually baptized me when I was 4. And he ended up being the suffragan bishop of Texas. as I was going through the process for ordination. So the connection with him went from Mexico City to Texas, and then he encouraged me to go to Virginia Theological Seminary, where his son was the treasurer. And David Charlton was also a member of Christ Church way back when. But I remember Sunday school. I remember coming down for cookies and lemonade.
Another leader at Christ Church through the decades has been Mother Susan. She joined Christ Church in 1984 and immediately joined the choir. In addition to regular preaching and celebrating, she was also the director of Christian education for decades.
Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, be among you and remain with you always. Amen.
Cambiaban muchos horarios, ¿sí? De la hora del servicio de la mañana, del servicio de las 10, ¿sí? Hasta cuando vino aquí el señor Carr, no, el señor, no, Vincent Juan. Él estuvo aquí por 10 años, ¿sí? Y él es el que cambió también el horario de los servicios, ¿sí? Ya eran un poco más tarde, ¿sí? Y fue cuando hicieron también aquí la iglesia, que tuvieran servicio aquí a los de español, ¿sí?
You know, I came to Mexico with the idea of being the dean of the seminary, not with the idea of being the rector of Christ Church. It just happened to be so that the previous rector left, decided to leave Christ Church. I think he took another position in Florida, if I remember right, and they needed an interim, and so I didn't even start as rector. I started as an interim. I was there for 2 years, and then the parish decided to hire me as the rector of the parish. And lots of things happened during those 10 years. Challenging things, good things, and also difficult things. But looking back, what I realized is that, you know, one of my goals of being the rector of Christ Church was to integrate the parish to the diocese. The parish, for many years, had considered itself as something very independent from the Diocese of Mexico. And I felt very connected to Mexico because I was the dean of the seminary. So because I was teaching students and because I was visiting parishes in the diocese, my connection went back way before I ever became dean in terms of my connection with Mexico. For 10 years, I was bringing parish priests from the United States to learn about Mexican culture and about Hispanic ministry. I was doing that years before I became the rector of the Christ Church, or before I became the dean of the seminary. So one of the things I felt was a real need, and Bishop and the bishop at that time, Bishop Sergio, agreed with me that it was important to integrate Christ Church to the diocese, and not only that, but that there was literally nothing in the north of the city for Spanish-speaking Anglicans. Nothing. And there still isn't to this day. There's no parish in the north. All of the Anglican Episcopal parishes are in the south of the city. And so, or on the outside or other places. And so I just felt that there was a great need. I mean, the closest parish for someone who lived in the north would have been the cathedral downtown. And it just seemed absurd. We're in the north. We have this huge area in the northern part of Mexico, in the state of Mexico, and there's no outreach there, no. And I just felt that there was incredible potential. So I think that, you know, my first inclination was, how do we integrate Christ Church to the diocese? How do we make them feel that they're not just an Episcopal parish from the USA or an Anglican parish from the Church of England or from some other country? And so how do we become part of the life and the vision and the future of the Anglican Church of Mexico? And also there was a big move and push at that time, which is legitimate, that the Anglican Church of Mexico was part of the Episcopal Church of the United States. They chose to separate and become an independent province. And then there was a real strong movement within the Anglican Church of Mexico to have its own identity, And so no longer to just have an identity connected to its missionary past, like its connection to the Diocese of to Texas especially, they had a strong connection, but with the Episcopal Church itself, which is part of the roots of the church. And they wanted to kind of rescue their Mexican past and their Mexican history, which included, of course, the Church of Jesus, which were the founding priests who were ex-Roman Catholic priests who wanted to have this national church, but didn't have enough support and ended up going to the Episcopal Church in order to legitimize their ministry and being able to have Episcopal ministry. So that was my vision. That's what I wanted. And I think the challenge is always of any leader in a parish is that, well, is that the vision of everybody else in the parish? And I think I saw the need, and I had, a strong desire to begin that part of Christ Church Parish, but I of course I had no idea what the challenges were going to be.
Nosotros conocimos la iglesia anglicana hace aproximadamente 30 años. De hecho, fue en la colonia Jusco, ahí en San Lucas, porque mi suegra conoció al padre Sergio Saavedra. Entonces, pues nos invitaron a la iglesia y nosotros fuimos a conocerla. Fue pues una experiencia muy bonita porque pues de entrada el recibimiento que nos dieron nos agradó mucho y bueno, pues hasta la fecha nosotros seguimos. Posteriormente mi suegra hizo un coro de la iglesia con todos los nietos que tenía, que en ese tiempo estamos hablando a lo mejor entre 6 y 10 años, de todos los sobrinos que había, hizo un coro en la iglesia. Ya cuando pasó el tiempo, pues nosotros nos venimos para Huixquilucan por las distancias de que mi hija Jos se quedó en la prepa 4, entonces pues ya nos quedaba demasiado retirado. Entonces tenemos una casa en Huixquilucan y nos venimos a vivir ahí desde esa fecha. Nosotros de hecho la casa la tenemos desde hace aproximadamente 40 años ahí, pero pues estábamos con mis suegros viviendo allá. Y posteriormente pues pasa el tiempo, seguimos conociendo más ministerios, más misiones que había dentro de la iglesia anglicana, que nos fueron tomando en cuenta, nos fueron llamando para ir participando, y pues hasta la fecha aquí estamos, padre. Y ahora más porque mi hija Jos hace 2 años fue ordenada como diácono, y hace 1 año, el 10 de mayo, la ordenaron como presbítera. Entonces pues yo aquí vamos a seguir, primero Dios, todo el tiempo que sea posible, y apoyando a la iglesia en lo que más podamos. En ese tiempo, cuando nosotros llegamos, estaba de rector padre Vincent, y él hacía muchas actividades, así como madre Elizabeth, que le gusta hacer muchas actividades, también a padre Vincent. Y había veces que en Navidad hacía concursos de canto y ponía a los niños a cantar, a hacer pastorelas, sí. Entonces, pues en algún momento los puso a cantar a cada quien. Yo recuerdo que Gaby me cantó una canción, ellos también pues hacían sus actividades de jóvenes, o sea, en ese tiempo había muchísimos.
Y entonces ahí exactamente es donde empieza pues mi fe prácticamente. En mi encuentro cara a cara con Jesús. Y entonces me doy cuenta de que Él siempre estuvo conmigo, en todo momento, pero no lo sabía. No lo sabía. Había pasado por distintas cosas, problemas, etcétera, pero pues yo no sabía que para mí Jesús era un revolucionario simplemente. Digo, no con armas, claro, ¿verdad? Pero un revolucionario al final de cuentas, ¿no? Y yo decía, bueno, pues qué bueno, me agrada, ¿no? Que él busque la paz, la tranquilidad, el bien de todos, pero pues es una persona como yo, que busca el bien. Y bueno, pues a través de Cursillo empiezo a conocerle y a crecer en fe en él y caminar con él. Sin darme cuenta tampoco, otra vez, volvemos a lo mismo, a través de los evangelios, a través del estudio, a través de los compañeros, de los mismos, de la feligresía, a la iglesia que asistíamos. Y en esos momentos empiezo a trabajar, porque me invitan ahora sí que a participar, ahí en Cursillo nos invitan a dar rollos, pláticas de varios, entonces a mí me invitan a dar un rollo o una plática del ideal. ¿Cuál era mi ideal? Pues mi ideal exactamente me costó mucho trabajo porque armar esa plática, porque no es lo mismo hablar de ser una persona idealista en términos generales que hablar de un ideal de fe. Entonces, pues me pasaba las noches trabajando, escribiendo, borrando y nada, no encontraba nada, ¿no? Hasta el final de cuentas, logré armar una plática misma que me da mucho gusto, obviamente, y no tan solo porque yo la dije, sino porque esto trajo como consecuencia que ahora, hasta la actualidad, hay un padre, un sacerdote, que a través de mi plática, de mi rollo, él sintió ese deseo de llevar la palabra a los demás. O sea, tomar los hábitos, ir a, ¿cómo se llama? Donde estudian, un seminario, en San Jorge, y ahora él está en Cancún, está allá oficiando. Y como anécdota, siempre que nos encontramos, me culpa, y qué bueno que me culpe, es bueno, por tu culpa yo soy un sacerdote. Por tu culpa esto, porque si no hubiera sido por ti, yo no lo hubiera sido. Pero no fue por mi culpa, fue porque solamente fui un medio a través de Dios, un instrumento que me puso en el camino de...
For many years, the Spanish-speaking community at Christ Church has continued to grow. Padre Germán has served as a primary pastor for the Spanish-speaking service since he was ordained a priest in 2016.
Nigerian community has been here for over 48 years. If I can still remember, one of our uncles that came into Mexico, he came around 1978. And so he was introduced to this church by some other Nigerian communities who were here before him. So he's a staunch Anglican. He's been attending, but for some reasons of proximity, when he relocated to other sides of Mexico, that was when he stopped attending as he should. So Nigerian community never started with us here in the present time. It started over 48 years ago.
Right, I would like future generation to know that Christ Church is a very spirit-filled church. This church has been existing before ever we were born. And we are blessed at Christ Church with so many priests coming in, going in, members, old members, new members. Christ Church is a multicultural church. Everybody's welcome. White, black, men, women, boy, girl, everybody. And so at Christ Church, we see God's love in so many things that we do at church, but from worshiping, from sharing, coffee, chit-chat, cake, and everything. So we are very happy at Christ Church, and we know that when our generation will go, and the next generation will continue. It's like a phase. So we're very happy at Christ Church. We are blessed. It's a very spirit-filled church. We are growing spiritually.
When we look at the word love, from the Christ Church point of view, I think here is all about accommodating, sharing. There are so many ways the church has shown love, not just by saying it, but very practical. So it's accommodating. It plays advisory role in so many ways. You run to the church, tell them your problems, and I think they have people that can provide solutions to those problems. So the church is very loving. So
my family, generation to generation, has been going to Anglican, or began going to Anglican since 1925. And growing up, I promised God that I'll be Anglican priest. Because of some 1 or 2 challenges, I couldn't fulfill the dream. But here at Christ Church, I serve God as an acolyte, which is still close to priest. So I see my life, at the moment I'm not a priest, but I see my life like I'm still fulfilling life ambition. So at Christ Church, my spiritual faith is growing in the sense that not only about the preaching, not about the hymn, not about worshipers, but serving God in a capacity of as an acolyte makes me feel good. My brother David introduced me to Christ Church. And since I've been coming to Christ Church, I've been blessed. Same like other Nigerians. It's a very spirit-filled church, and we look forward every Sunday coming to church. As you can see, Nigerian community is growing, that even most of the kids from Nigerian community are part of Sunday school services. And so we feel happy here, and whenever we leave Mexico, going back home or to other countries, other sort of Nigerians will still continue in Christ Church, because it didn't start with us and it will not end with us. So this is a very spirit-filled church. We're very happy. We feel at home at Christ Church.
My earliest memories are not really of the actual church. You know, the church in Artículo 123. It's actually of the rectory and the rectory garden, the old rectory and the old rectory garden, which was huge, because every year they would have the Christmas bazaar there. When I was about 2, 3, 4 years old in the early '80s, and my mom would always take my brother and me unless we were sick or something else, or there was a problem, we would always go there, and it was a wonderful treat to go in and see the people selling things and singing Christmas carols and everything. And it was really beautiful. I still remember the smell of the fudge, which I still get every year, the the sandwiches, and the camaraderie. People like my mother's friends coming up to talk to her. Many of them are no longer here. They're no longer with us, but I still have the memory of them very strongly. And there are two particularly that I remember that were parishioners in Christ Church. One of them was Pat Bano. She was a very funny, very down-to-earth, very sort of, she was elegant, but she wasn't vain. She was always very, or self-conscious. She would always tell jokes, sometimes not very appropriate ones, but she would tell jokes, and I still remember that. And and I also remember, on a more spiritual level, my godmother, whom was her name was Mrs. Charmian Shaw. Her husband was Bill Shaw, and they were both very kind, decent people. And Mrs. Shaw was especially for me, she was a great inspiration, because she always had a very strong faith. And even when she was very ill with breast cancer, because she was ill for many years with breast cancer, I think about 14 years altogether, and her faith never wavered, at least not that I could see. She never gave up on either, her treatments or getting better, trying to get better, and she never gave up her faith. She always prayed. She always seemed so grateful for every day that she had to live. She told me so. She said, every day that I live is a gift from God, because I know that a lot of people that I've met on this journey have already passed on. So I'm grateful for the time I have with my family. And she also told me once that I'd never forget. She said, God answers our prayers, but not always in the way we would want.
One of the wonderful things about this parish is that praying in this beautiful place where we are both a congregation, wherever two or three are gathered together in my name, there shall I be, but also appreciating the glory of God through the beauty of the reredos, through the glory of the stained glass, that looking ahead, we also look back, that we have these beautiful things that generations before us gave us. Perhaps we might be able to give the spirit, to continue the spirit of this place dedicated to the glory of God.
I just want to greet you, all of you, and to say that as a diocesan bishop from the Diocese of Mexico, and now as your primate bishop, I am very happy and very blessed about this ministry. I just want to call you, everybody, to be a sign of this transforming love of God in our communities and in our church. And the blessing of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with you all, always. Quiero agradecer a todos y cada uno de ustedes por su misión y ministerio. Gracias por ser un signo del amor transformador de Dios en nuestras vidas, en nuestras comunidades y en nuestra iglesia. Que la bendición del Padre, el Hijo y el Espíritu Santo sea con ustedes y los suyos este día y siempre. Amén.